Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody, and tonight is going to be a very interesting show. A lot of different topics. The main science topic I'm going to be talking about something called the Betz limit. That's in aerodynamics. It's the amount of energy you can extract from the air using kinetic energy. And so it's a very interesting problem because it's universally misused in the science and engineering world, and it has been misused, and so I'm going to explain that in great detail tonight. So that's the main science topic I'll get to in a few minutes. But first, the wildfires in California. Now, I typically don't comment on a lot of things like this which become very political. And because you have the news media, you have major radio shows covering this, and typically then I would not step into this arena because there's so many people covering it. But in all of the news coverage that I've seen on this, where now they are looking for culpability, who's guilty of maybe just negligence, or some other people talking about did they do this on purpose, there's the whole spectrum. But the one thing that I have not heard anybody talk about is the fact, literally the fact, that the people in power there in California, the governor, the mayor of the Los Angeles area, and other people who are elected officials really are put there by a much higher, more invisible group of people. And that's the real story. If they weren't there, somebody else would be there. Someone else would be sitting in those positions doing the same things. And so you have to be careful talking about this, so I will preface this by saying what appears to me is that this was an orchestrated takeover of some of the most expensive property on the planet. So if you burn it all down, all the people are gone, all the houses are gone. We look at Katrina, we look at the Maui fire. The same thing happened, where you literally obliterate what's there and make it so inhospitable that nobody can move back there. There's nothing for them to go back for. And then you let looters and rioters in there. It's just an unsafe place for people to even go. And then they have to find someplace else to go. So we're talking 250,000 people in the Los Angeles region who've been burned out of their houses and have no place to go. And these are some of the most successful, wealthy people, if you consider success in terms of monetary value and ability to buy housing in these really exclusive areas of the United States. Really the most exclusive property along the beachfront, etc. And so in 2 or 3 years, the vegetation is going to grow back, the bulldozers come in and just bulldoze everything down, and you're going to have prime real estate available, and a lot of these people had no insurance. How do you insure a $13 million house? The other thing is, from what I understand, is that a few months prior to this, anybody who did have fire insurance had it canceled. So the big insurance companies knew that this thing was coming, whether by natural means or by any other means, nefarious means, that they knew this was coming because of the way the forests were managed. Now, the LA hillsides are highly forested. When you see these fires, the woods come right up to the houses, and a lot of these houses are $10, $15, $20 million mansions with outdoor swimming pools and, just absolutely luxurious. Like some of them are like little ranches. But a tremendous amount of vegetation, and with it never being cleaned, you have all of this cinder dry, just ready like a popcorn ready to burn. And then when, of course, the winds come in, and there's even questions about whether the winds were man-manipulated. And that's an area of science that I've worked in professionally. And yes, it's very possible. Was it man-made winds? Were the winds sustained by man-made events? Because, and that's very possible. I can't say for sure, but it is a possibility. Those technologies exist to ward off the rain from coming in from the ocean, from the putting a blockage. And we've seen that before, where they've actually been able to put up like a wall, literally a wall where the clouds coming in off the Pacific Ocean come in close to California and then go north, completely bypassing California to keep it dry. The reservoirs are not being filled where the firemen go out to fight a fire and there's no water. And leading up years and years of not allowing anybody into those forests to clean it up. There's reports of people in, say, Finland, who they have the same issue. They have potential forest fire issues, and when trees fall down, or a lot of pine trees, of course, they are just full of resin. They create a resin that's highly flammable, and so it's just a tinderbox. And once that fire starts and the winds are blowing, there's just no way to stop it. And so it's prevention. It had to be prevention, and we've seen cases time and time again where the leaders, the governor, the mayor, etc., and other people did things that were counterproductive that really made this fire possible. In fact, it guaranteed that this area would burn. And I'm not going to go into all of those details. However, the point I want to make about this, and the only point, is that the orchestration that takes place in government position happens invisibly above the Gavin Newsoms, the mayor of Los Angeles, above these people. The orchestration of taking over large sections of high real estate land, it's going on all over the world right now. In the Gaza region, for example, there are vast oil reserves. Is that why they're there? I really am not an insider enough to know that, but you're looking at valuable property, and in other parts of the world, where there are groups that are vying for the property of other regions, and making. But anyway, those are all of those political issues that I don't get into. All I'm saying is that there are cases in the past where large sections of land have been taken over by surreptitious means to literally move the people out of there and reclaim that land, pennies on the dollars. We've seen entire cities burn in the last number of years, where the entire regions of downtown areas of cities have burned, and people come in then and buy that up, pennies on the dollars, and then reclaim that land after it's being torched. So at any rate, but the whole point is that this is always pointed to as some little local group or someone over there is responsible. And that's the easy road out. And that's why the news media is not covering the fact that the hierarchy of, even anybody say the state of California governor, he doesn't control what's going on. He's working in a chain of command. He's a clog in the gear of one of the wheels in the hierarchy of control. very simply put. And if he weren't there, someone else would be there. So when everybody focuses their rage on him, that's the wrong person. You have to find out the people who are truly responsible. So that's all I'm going to say about this topic, but it's the whole issue is understanding the structure of the world government. And when you go up through, say, Congress, or you go through state legislatures, or the legal system, or the banking system run out of, say, the Federal Reserve, it has nothing to do with the United States. I remember Barbara Walters one time was interviewing Ronald Reagan, and she said, why don't you just go over to the Federal Reserve and tell them to change the rates and rein in inflation, or whatever the discussion was? And Ronald Reagan said, well, that's the Federal Reserve. It's autonomous. I don't have any control. She didn't know that the Federal Reserve is not controlled by the president. The president doesn't have any authority. The Federal Reserve is a foreign bank in our country, and it's operated by a European bank, the Rothschild Banking Center, that comes out of London and Rome. So if you don't understand these things, then you're pointing the finger at all the wrong people, and that's the point. That the mainstream media, even the if you look at both sides of the dialogue, nobody has got the story straight. Okay, end of story. That's all I'm going to say. But if you really want to find culpability or who's responsible, then you have to understand how the world really spins. I want to take a few seconds here to talk about how I became familiar with this world structure that exists. And when I got, I was, let's see, this would have been after I was at Cornell, where I saw manipulation of data, scientific fudging. It was horrific. I could not believe that a higher level institution, a research institution, much more than an education institution, had the amount of basically scientific corruption that was ongoing. But at any rate, after Cornell, I came back and started developing my electromagnetic propulsion systems, because I knew about the electromagnetic condition of the solar system, where the electric and magnetic fields were, and therefore was designing electromagnetic propulsion systems, something that is still obfuscated up to today. And that's, I'm not going to go into those, that's a topic for another show. But I ended up in Los Angeles, interestingly enough, in the venture capital groups that I was looking for funding. And so I would go to these meetings, and part of it was being vetted by physicists, very good physicists, people who worked a lot of them had patents, they worked in the aerospace industry. So me and my designs were being vetted by high-level physicists, and that was accomplished. And then it moved on to the funding stages, where they were looking for funding, starting a company, and doing the research to develop the electromagnetic propulsion systems. And these were for also in atmosphere, in outer space, and for all kinds of applications, docking mechanisms, and spacecraft. So I'm in these venture capital meetings, and what finally was the final straw for them regarding me is I told them I didn't want my electromagnetic propulsion system designs being used to deliver nuclear bombs or used for warfare. And well, of course, that's exactly what they wanted to do. And so I was distanced from my own projects. And later I know that they went on and developed these. The designs were stolen by a number of aerospace companies there who had the designs. They were passed by the venture capital groups. And many years later, I got a call from a physicist who was working in Boulder, Colorado at one of the skunk works. They are called, you know, the tier 1 physicists, called me up, and he was asking me about some weather issues. And so, okay, I'm talking to him about that, and then we got just chatting about some other things. and I was talking about the electromagnetic propulsion systems. And after talking for a little while, he said, wait a minute. He said, everything you're talking about, I've worked on these projects, and there's no way you could even know about this because these are highly classified projects. And I said, yeah, I designed them. I designed those systems. And he was shocked because the projects he had worked on, I knew all the details of how they worked and etc. But at any rate, so I know they developed my project, and I know from other reasons also. But at any rate, getting back to the venture capital groups. Now, these are the groups that can move congressional money in an afternoon, $10 million to form a company. They were forming companies in Los Angeles, and this was going on in farther north in the San Francisco area also in that time frame, where they had, and all the way down to San Diego. There's just a tremendous amount of money being spent there on aerospace and aerospace technology. It was the early 80s, so in the midst of the Cold War, etc. So at any rate, I start going to these meetings, and I'm going to offices, downtown LA, skyrises, and I'm sitting there with the physicists who are vetting this, and talking about because they were familiar with the formation of companies and what it would take, what kinds of engineering staff, etc. And what I noticed is that the staff, the people working in these offices, and I would hear them. I'd hear a young guy, maybe 23, 24 years old, dressed in impeccable suits with Lamborghinis and gorgeous girlfriends or wives. And they're on the phone to a congressman screaming, I want $10 million in this account today. And the congressman would do it. And I'm going, whoosh. I said, what college did they go to? I must have got the wrong education here, because these guys are clearly right out of college in moving senators to move money, huge amounts of money, and on the phone, going, what's going on here? And then I realized that these people were all multinationals. They could speak multiple languages. They would they were clearly different variety of human beings. I don't like the word races, because we're all human beings. But they were from all different countries. They were Arabs. They were from Egypt. They were from Middle East. There were the Israelis. There were Americans and Turkey, from all different countries, and they're all mixed into these venture capital offices where they're getting government money and starting these high-tech businesses. And I was going to be one of them. And I thought to myself, and then I realized, well, these are the kids of the guys that are the older people in this venture capital group. And there were many, many venture capital groups there who were working this system, this government system of money. And then it dawned on me, I said, wow, these are the families that operate the military-industrial complex. They live up in the very richest areas of Hollywood, and the coastal houses all the way down the coast to San Diego. And these people are rolling in money, but nobody, I'd never seen their names in politics or anything before. These are the real families that operate the world. And so I did some investigating, and I made an estimate. And I said there are an estimate of about 6,000 people in these families who are operating the military-industrial complex. And these are families. These are kids that are born into this. They didn't go to college and get a degree and get hired. Their dad, their grandfather, their great-grandfather was in this Los Angeles and West Coast and other parts of the country businesses with the military-industrial complex. And that's my first view of who's really operating the world. As they say, the congressmen are window dressing. They're to give the illusion that the United States has this democracy or republic, if you want to be specific, with elected officials, and they pass legislation and this, on and on and on. No. No. The world is run by extended families, and they come out of these various places, and they're all over the world. And that's when I also realized that the CIA was the police force of the World Bank. They have nothing to do with the United States. And if you look at their history and how they were formed, and the Dulles brothers and, Wild Bill Donovan and those people, they were the poster child. They were to give you the impression that this was American. But behind there were these groups of people who operate basically all the governments of the world. And if they don't cooperate, they go in and take care of business. There's a book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. If you want to know a little more about this, that's just another confirmation. There's other books like Compromised, the Terry Reid book. Read those books and you get an earful of what's going on this planet. Okay, so I just wanted to put that in here because in this time of strife with Los Angeles literally burning to the ground, the equivalent of a nuclear bomb hitting, the equivalent, and destroying the lives and the property of hundreds of thousands of people. But like I say, in a couple of years, all that property is going to be redeveloped. So when the mayor goes, we will rebuild, oh yeah, they're gonna, but not for the people that used to live there, that currently were residents and now everything is gone. Those people are going to scatter to the four winds because there will be new people in there in the future, possibly a planned city, and this is some of the highest stake real estate on the planet. So that's the real story. Okay, so there's a few follow-up stories from previous shows that I want to get in a little bit of detail here. And which show was it? I believe it was the December, would have been the 17th show, I believe. I talked about the physics of snowflakes, a very interesting show because snowflakes need electric fields to grow. And this has been proven in a laboratory. Very interesting work by physicists. And by the way, once again, I'll repeat it. These physicists that did the work on snowflakes, working in their laboratory, trying to understand a physical principle, that's my ideal of a physicist. And that's originally, just to be specific, that's the kind of work that originally the Nobel Prize was designed for. The whole idea of the Nobel Prize was for as an individual scientist pursuing his interests in developing new concepts, new theoretical work, whatever it was. But it's moved into this political arena where big groups of people, government funding, like say, for example, the Big Bang or other teams that are developing whatever it is. Of course, the prize has to go to an individual, so a lot of times it's an older person who's been working along this theme for maybe decades, but still part of a university-funded, which is literally government funding, and it's become highly politicized. The political correctness in the Nobel Prize, especially in physics, is unbelievable. It's just over the top. And so, at any rate, getting back to the topic of snowflakes, the people who were studying snowflakes in a laboratory, that's the original concept of the Nobel Prize. Individuals looking at something, making great discoveries. But at any rate, I had some more slides here that I wanted to show of photographs that people sent in and showing crystals growing on a window. And the way this happens is in the cold winter months where people have cold, and then the humidity, a lot of times there might be a draft there or something, maybe a little piece of insulation in the door that's sorry, my alarm going off. The little piece of insulation missing, or that rubber trim that goes around the door is missing or something, and so some water vapor is leaking out there and it freezes on the window. that is exposed to very high, very low temperatures, of course, in the wintertime. And so people had sent in these images of ice crystals, and they grow in these beautiful patterns, but they're random. They look like fractal types of developments, and then there's some like curlicue. So I want to just show a few of these, and just to give you an idea of what people sent in. But I encourage you to look at that December 17th show, The Physics of Snowflakes. And by the way, we did have 2 weeks, December 24th and 31st, where we did not have a show because the studio in New York City was closed for the holidays. So anyway, we're back again, and so let's take a look at some of these beautiful snow images that people have sent in. We'll just step through these and so there you go. A few more additional photos. I just want a quick comment on some of the really bizarre misinformation that's coming out of some of the very big radio shows these days. And I'm just amazed it's where these people make this stuff up. I don't know where they get this, but they're just making stuff up, just bizarre facts about the solar system, etc. And there's one group that keeps referring to something called the Younger Dryas, putting all the Earth disasters in this one period of time. And here's the situation. Here's the situation, because a lot of these people are actually good researchers, but then they come off with these really bizarre conclusions, especially dating conclusions. And so anyway, I want to go through something here that most of you probably never ever see. I've seen this many times because I've been in radio and around radio, and now this television show, etc., this type of medium, long before this huge wave of internet. Now there's, like 20 years ago, there were 5 to 6 major radio shows that covered these kinds of topics. And now there's maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands, and most of them repeat what they hear on somebody else's channel. That's something I don't do. When you hear something from me, it's because I was there, I've been there, I've done this myself. And so you're hearing it from somebody who's a scientist who really knows about this. And I have very good background, very good training, and very good world experiences. But a lot of these people just, I don't know where they come off with this, but let me explain what happens typically to, especially like a big radio show or podcast now. A lot of times they have camera, even though you're just sitting and looking at the person talking. They have very few visuals. I try and put more visuals in my show. But a lot of these shows, it's just 2 people sitting there talking back and forth, or one person talking, and you just look at them the whole time on the podcast. But at any rate, what happens with some of these shows that get really big, once they start having a fan base and they start getting too political on certain topics that are taboo, what happens is somebody comes in from outside and they go, "Oh, you did a bad thing here," and they bring up some kind of, it's very typically a lawsuit of some kind, a big lawsuit where it's like, you're going to be in big trouble. And they put the pressure on these people, and then they come in and they say, all of this could go away if you just cooperated with us. And we'll insert our person there, basically a handler, who will control the information you put on your radio show. And by the way, that's why you don't find me on some of these really big radio shows. I've been on the biggest ones in the country. But there's some of them that they won't touch me with a 10-foot pole because I'm not controlled. But at any rate, what happens then is the host of this really big radio show has 2 options. The radio show is going to go away, and they're going to face all this legal difficulty, or they play ball and say, we'll drop all of this, you just take our handler, which they don't call a handler. They are the person that will screen your information so that this doesn't happen to you again. You see how nice they put it, the way they just put that butter on the bread just like jam. And so then all of a sudden the talk show host gets promoted, gets pushed out, and gets really big, and everybody's happy. The talk show host, the people, the controllers, the handlers, and the whole chain of command is real happy because they're getting their information out to the public. So then they start putting on guests. And I'm not going to mention names here, but a lot of times, in some cases, they are people with PhDs. They're outreach people. They may have a position of some kind. But they're the kind of people that are talking standard science. Let's just put it that way. They wouldn't vary outside of that. There's certain parameters they talk within, and that's it. And then they have the other side, the kind of the non-standard side, and that's all programmed and promulgated. And those people also make a lot of money. They get to sell their books. They get to go on tours. They get to be on these big radio shows. They get to say anything they want. But then this issue of the younger dryas, and I want to be specific about that because it's just getting so much airtime. It would be around, what they're claiming is around 11 to 12,000 years ago that all of these major disasters occurred on Earth, and that like everything in the kitchen sink that would have happened then, which is simply not true. We know for a fact that there have been many Earth disasters, and they were caused by big passing comets. And so what these groups also talk about are like collisions. Things, it's all the old NASA story. If you listen to my show last week, I go into detail on this. It's a chapter in one of my books, The Real History of Man, Myths, Magic, and Mayhem. One of the chapters in the book is an asteroid hit it. So in the world of NASA, if they can't explain something, a comet explodes into brightness, there's a die-off, there's a mass extinction, whatever it is, an asteroid hit it. If there's a change in the magnetic field, an asteroid hit it. If there are diamonds found, microdiamonds found someplace, an asteroid hit it. Or, anyway, that's the standard solution for all of their unexplained problems. So I just want, for people who are out scouring and trying to learn, all I want to tell you is that there's a lot of very well-planned misinformation out there, and a lot of people are getting very wealthy off of it. So that's the story. Okay, the next topic I want to talk about is the space elevator. Now, it seems like I spend a lot of my time, and throughout my career, in fact, I've spent a lot of time straightening out some just really bad misconceptions. And I don't know how this idea even got traction, because it is so bad in so many ways. But yet it popped up as kind of ugly little head again the other day. And somebody sent me this video, and I thought, okay, well, since this is being visited by a lot of people on the internet, I'll see if I can straighten this out. The so-called space elevator. Now, everybody wants to find an interesting way to get into outer space, but it simply takes a lot of energy. Getting through the atmosphere, that's one issue, and just getting up that first 100 miles into low Earth orbit is a big deal. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of oomph. And so I, in fact, have my own method of getting into low Earth orbit. And but I'm not going to talk about that, because I personally believe in runway to orbit and then orbit to runway. And I'm not talking, because like, say, for example, a space shuttle landed on a runway, but it took off vertically. It was a vertical takeoff, heavy-duty rocket, 7 million pounds of thrust, mainly to lift a little bit of weight into outer space. And then if you have to lift that shuttle every time, that's, in most cases, if you're just launching a little satellite, then a lot of the payload is the shuttle, and it really was not a good system. The Russians had a space shuttle long before the United States, and they abandoned it. They said, this is not you keep sending this big, massive machine into space only to bring it back down, and it's not worth the energy loss due to lifting this big, massive machine into space. But so there are all these different ideas of how to get into outer space. I talked earlier in the show about my electromagnetic propulsion systems, and that's a very interesting design because it is non-inertial. In other words, you don't blast hot air or gases out of a nozzle. It works against the local magnetic fields, and so you do not carry mass with you. It's not an inertial propulsion system. Okay, but I'm not going to go into that today. That's another topic for another show. Space elevator. Okay, now let's first of all define the concept, although ludicrous. Let's first define that. The idea is that you take some massive object, something big. Either you can launch this from Earth and you get it up into a geosynchronous orbit. That's where the geosynchronous satellites live. Many of them, like when you watch television, a lot of times it's for satellite TV. And remember that, for example, Musk and Bezos have these fleets of low Earth orbit satellites for the what is it, Starlink of Musk. And those are low Earth orbit. So a lot of traditionally, the telecommunication satellites live in a orbit which is called geosynchronous, and that means that the satellite sits up in the sky right above Earth, and it rotates exactly when the Earth rotates in one day. This exactly rotates in one day also. So the idea with the space elevator is you get some kind of big mass up there. I mean, it might be a space station, it might be some mass, or it might be an asteroid that you spear it in from someplace else and you get it into this low Earth orbit, but it's like a excuse me, a very massive object. Okay, so first of all, how do you get that there? How much energy, because the idea is that you want to stop this, you're burning up huge amounts of fuel to get payloads into low Earth orbit. That's typically the destination, is low Earth orbit. So how do you do that economically and easily? And so this idea of the space elevator, so you have this massive object up in geosynchronous orbit, which is sitting right above the same place on planet Earth all the time. And so day and night, winter, summer, whatever, that object is right there. And by the way, that's not free. Those objects require continual positioning maintenance. And so they're constantly wandering off out of there. There are other effects. There's the effect of the sun. There's the effect of Jupiter. There's the effect of variations and just all kinds of things that happen to move these things slightly out of their particular orbit. And so that has to be constantly adjusted. So that's one of the issues. And so that's not free. That takes a lot of energy. And if it's a big object, it's going to take a lot of energy just to keep that maintained in that geosynchronous orbit. And they never talk about that. They never talk about that. But let's pretend you've got this object, excuse me, in outer space, very massive object. And you do have to calculate the amount of energy to get it there. Because and then the idea is you drop a string down to Earth, a very strong string, and typically that'd be something like carbon fiber, very low mass, because the string itself has a lot of weight, and just the tension on the string is something. Now you're going to hook something to that and pull it up like an elevator. Okay, so let's compare this to an Earth elevator. You're in a building, you get in the elevator, okay, you go up the elevator or you go down the elevator, and they have counterweights. Okay, so when you're going up the elevator, the what is really lifting, it's not lifting the whole elevator, it's lifting just the people in the elevator, because the elevator has counterweights. So that if you want to move, if say you were just moving an empty elevator, it would take very little energy to do this because the counterweights are there. But the fact is that you are hooked to a building which was solidly sitting on the ground. And so you can go through 100 years of using an elevator, and the building is made out of steel structure, and then it's reinforced, and it has all the, it's a very strong structure, and it's nailed to the earth. It's fixed to the earth. So when you're going up, you're pushing against the earth, and then when you come back down the elevator, you're dropping back down and regaining that energy, etc. So a building on earth, that's most people's concept of an elevator. But it doesn't work that way when you have a space elevator with a massive rock up there. So just from the get-go, when you put a weight on this and then pull this up with your elevator string, the string that's pulling this weight up, the object, guess what? It's going to get pulled down. It's going to lose energy because you're bringing this other object up. So they never think about that. They never talk about that there is a loss of energy. So where does that come from? It's not free. You have to put that back into your mass up there, and if you don't, that thing's going to wander out of its orbit. And so right from the get-go, this idea is stupid. It doesn't work. It has all kinds of problems. Now let's forget about that. Let's play devil's advocate. And what bugs me, this is being promoted by young people, PhDs in physics. And they don't know, it's really bothered me over the decades that I've worked in the professional field of physics. These young people come out of a PhD program and they don't know anything. I'm just shocked and amazed. They just are clueless. They think they're so smart. They talk, chatter their physics, but they don't know anything. They have no clue of what's going on. Wait till the punchline, and I'll reinforce that. Let's put it that way. So now let's pretend that your big mass up there doesn't lose any energy, and you can pull something up into low Earth orbit. Okay, well, boys and girls, what's going to happen? Now, the velocity at low Earth orbit is much higher than the velocity at the geosynchronous orbit. The angular velocity, in other words, it takes about, if you're in low Earth orbit, the orbital period is about 90 minutes, let's just say roughly. You're in an orbit, low Earth orbit, 90 minutes. The geosynchronous orbit, way up there, is around, and I believe this is about 25,000 miles, 23,000 miles, something like that, above the Earth, geosynchronous orbit. The period of the orbit of the geosynchronous orbit is 24 hours, give or take a couple seconds, equal to the amount of time that it takes the Earth to spin around once. So you have low Earth orbit, 90-minute period, geosynchronous orbit, 1 day, 24 hours. And so what's the problem? Okay, so you bring your mass up, your satellite or whatever you want to put into low Earth orbit, and now you let it go. What's going on? It doesn't have enough velocity to stay in low Earth orbit. So now you got to bring up a rocket with a lot of fuel. And as soon as you let go with your space elevator, as soon as you let go of that object, you got to kick an engine in and burn a lot of fuel to get that moving horizontal to keep it into low Earth orbit. So now all of a sudden you're not just lifting up a payload like they show in the pretty pictures that they draw. You have to bring up a rocket to get it into orbital insertion. And if you don't do that really quickly, that thing, as soon as you let go of it from your space elevator rope, it's going to start dropping down. It's going to drop back down to Earth in a New York second. So this thing is a monster mess from the get-go. So you've reduced the energy of your big mass up in geosynchronous orbit because you had to pull something up. That does not happen in the Earth-based building elevator, but of course they don't think about that. Plus, once you get the thing up to low Earth orbit, you have to have a rocket to insert it into low Earth orbit with a tremendous amount. So you got to lift the rocket up too, and all its fuel. So where's the savings here? Plus, you got to now put more energy back into your big mass up there because it's going to wander out of its orbit because you extracted energy from this object. It's going to slow it down. It's going to bring it into a different orbit. And unless you make up for that with the big object, then your big object is going to move out of its orbit. Do you see what I mean? So this is not free. They make it sound like, oh, you just put this heavy mass up there, put a string down, you get this yo-yo like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And these people repeat this like, and they're physicists, people with PhDs in physics. Oh my goodness. Excuse me for getting a little bit on a rampage here. Okay, so the other problem is that they claim that this rope is just dangling there. It's not attached to Earth in any way. But as soon as you start lifting something off the surface of the Earth, not attached to Earth, it's going to be in its own orbit. So what's going to happen? The object is going to start moving backwards. And that's because it does not have enough velocity to stay in that orbit. It's now in orbit. And so the idea that this thing is going to come straight up is false. Patently false. So your nice elevator rope that's sticking straight up in the nice drawing that you have in your textbook doesn't work. As soon as you start lifting that object, it's going to swing backwards because it's in an orbit of its own. It does not have sufficient velocity to stay in that orbit, so it's going to move backwards on your string. Now you got a string that's no longer straight down, but swinging backwards. So it doesn't work to just have a dangling string. It has to be attached to Earth to maintain the tension in that string. And now as you go up, there's going to be a force this way, backwards on that. So you have to counteract that force as you raise the object up into a low Earth orbit. And then, like I say, you have to have a big rocket on there, so as soon as you let go of that object, it's going to be inserted into orbit. So this thing doesn't work at all. There's no savings. There's no freebie here because you have to immediately put energy into the big object up there. Okay, now we're going to get to the punchline. What these young physicists don't understand, because they never learned it in their book learning, is that there is something on Earth called a vertical electric field. And if you dangle a rope from above the atmosphere, down through the atmosphere, down to the surface of the Earth, it's going to discharge that vertical electric field. And you're going to cause one big mess down on planet Earth. Basically, a roaring hurricane. It would be developing at the bottom of your rope because that's how hurricanes form. So there again, students of science, physics, meteorology, whatever, think that hurricanes are formed from warm water. And I've talked about this idiocy on my show, that there's not enough energy in the warm water at the surface of the ocean to create and sustain a hurricane. And it violates the three laws of thermodynamics. You can't take a warm body of water and all of a sudden magically it forms this organized storm system and sustains it. It violates the three laws of thermodynamics, all three of them. And so it's just bizarre. But what does cause a hurricane to form is discharging the vertical electric field. That's what actually powers the hurricane. So your space tether, your space elevator cord, as soon as you drop that into the atmosphere, is going to discharge the vertical electric field, which is a capacitor. It's basically a charged layer at the ionosphere and ground at the base of the Earth with the Earth's atmosphere as a very good dielectric. And you're going to discharge that and cause a hurricane at the bottom and discharge that whole, that charged capacitor at the charge at the ionosphere. And you're going to cause a very big mess. It's going to kill birds, going to kill anything flying in that area. So, space elevator, terrible idea, terrible physics. It doesn't work from any point of view. So please, please, if you see somebody spouting space elevator, take them aside, turn them over to this show, and just tell them to go study their Physics 101 book, because literally the orbital dynamics of a space elevator simply don't work. And you would learn this in physics about 102, let's say, as a college undergrad, let alone somebody who's got a PhD. So at any rate, I had to get that out. Unfortunately, this thing pops up and you find it all over. You find hundreds of YouTube videos talking about space elevators, and it's just absolute absurdity. It doesn't work from any possible point of view. And from very simple physics up to the fact that it discharges the vertical electric field, of which they know nothing. That's what I say. These young PhD students come out, and they are just green behind the ears. And I've seen this going to American Geophysical Union meetings. You find these young PhD students. They don't know anything. What did they spend all those years and years of studying? They have no clue what's going on. They're very poorly educated. I'll just tell you that. Okay, so we're running a little bit late here on this show, only a little less than 10 minutes left to go, so I'm clearly not going to have time to talk about the Betz limit. I'll push that out until next week, but it's a show that you definitely want to listen to because it's something that affects your lives. Here's what it is. The Betz limit is the limit of energy you can extract from a column of wind. And it's used exclusively in the wind energy industry to estimate the amount of energy that can be extracted from the wind, typically by three-blade wind turbines in the commercial market. And unfortunately, it is very misused. It is very poorly understood, and it's a complicated topic. So it's going to require an entire complete show. So I'll jump into that next week. So be sure to listen, and especially if you have anything to do with the wind energy industry. And I've taught this to physicists, and some of them, the typical reaction of an educated physicist or a professor or somebody from a university is to get very angry when you point out that what they've been doing for 40, 50 years is complete garbage. Let's just put it that way. So be sure to join next week to get a feeling for this issue called the Betz limit. And I'll spend the last few minutes of this show just rounding out some of the concepts dealing with this space elevator idea, because I believe from what I talked about already, it's probably not real clear. And so let me just go into some details here. Remember, the idea is that you have this heavy object up in outer space in geosynchronous orbit. It then has a tether, a rope, that drops down to the surface of the Earth. And supposedly you can just willy-nilly pull stuff up into low Earth orbit and drop it off and it's good to go. And it's not true at all. It's really a bad idea. It just doesn't work at all. I mean, it's silliness. But at any rate, just to give you an idea of velocities, low Earth orbit velocity, the velocity required to keep something in orbit around Earth, this is like 124 miles up, is around 17,000 miles per hour. That's pretty fast. However, the geosynchronous orbital velocity, and that would be on your tether rope if this space elevator thing worked, say you could get something up to 124 miles above the surface of the Earth. The geosynchronous orbital velocity is around 1,000 miles per hour. So 17,000 miles an hour orbital insertion velocity, 1,000 miles per hour geosynchronous orbital velocity at that 124 mile up range. So that means that you have to pull a rocket up along with your payload on your space elevator, and that thing has to then provide enough energy for to go from 1,000 miles an hour up to 17,000 miles per hour. And this is really a big problem because now you have to haul this rocket up along with your payload, a big rocket. Now, if you look at real rockets that take off from, say, the Cape Canaveral or one of the other launch centers, and they're going into a low Earth orbit, what they do is they go up a little bit and they go relatively slowly. They go relatively slowly until they get up out of the thick part of the atmosphere. And they go slowly because the wind resistance it goes as v squared, velocity squared. And so that thick part of the atmosphere, you want to go pretty much as slow as possible. Plus it causes tremendous pressure on the rocket, etc. There's a lot of reasons why you want to go slowly through that thick part of the atmosphere. But as soon as you do, as soon as you get through that thick part of the atmosphere, what they do is they veer off and they start going what they call downrange. So the rocket is going already picking up velocity in the orbital direction. And so that's the issue with a real launch from a real rocket. By the time you get up out into the thin part of the atmosphere, that rocket is almost horizontal, because now what you're doing is you're inserting it into orbit. You're getting up to that 17,000 mile per hour velocity that you need to insert it into a low Earth orbit. With your space elevator, you bring that thing straight up. You don't go downwind, as they call it, and it's only going 1,000 miles an hour. Now you have to get it going 17,000 miles an hour to get it into orbit. So it's really, the space elevator thing just doesn't work. It's silliness, absolute silliness, and that's why you find it on the internet. Because the internet is full of silly science to keep you, the public, from understanding the real issues of how to get into outer space. And so if you want to go into a higher orbit, then you need more velocity, more energy, etc. But then you have other issues like the Van Allen belt. Is it a human payload? Is it a space station with human beings on it? Then you have problems with the radiation that's up above the low Earth orbit. And interestingly enough, since the days of Apollo, man has never, ever gone into an orbit that's higher than low Earth orbit. Actually, it was done 2 times. And both times were devastating. One time was with the space shuttle, and the astronauts' eyebrows started to glow. You know, like when you touch a Van de Graaff generator, one of those little laboratory experiments, you put a kid up on a wooden stool or chair, and they touch the Van de Graaff generator that's charging. It starts out at 0, and all of their hair stands straight out, and it starts shooting sparks out of their hair, etc. And so the same thing happens with the astronauts on the space shuttle when they went up into the lower Van Allen belts, and they became electrically charged, which I explain in my work, how that happens or what's going on there. And they brought them down immediately. So anyway, the majority of flights, of man-made flights, and a lot of satellites have remained in low Earth orbit because of that issue with the radiation belts. Just want to let you know that visit my webpage, jmccsci.com, and check out the books, the education packages, etc. Also the water filters, you can get to the water filter page from there, and the products that you very useful for your education and for your safety for water filtration. Go there once again, jmccsci.com, and we'll talk to you next week.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.